lately, I've been doing a lot of waiting. Many of you know that my wife and I and our children, we moved from Kentucky down to South Florida, which was an incredible transition, by the way. But we came down here about 13 months ago for the sole purpose of starting this new church in this community. That's what brought us down here. And the moment that we arrived in town, we began tirelessly working up until this very moment. But when we arrived, we also immediately began incessantly waiting for it all to happen, waiting for it to start, waiting for the grand opening to finally arrive. And oh, by the way, public service announcement, maybe you already know this, our grand opening of SoFlo Church is actually 3 weeks from today. September the 18th will be like the grand opening. We're so excited. That day, we'll start hosting 2 services at 9:30 and 11. They will be identical. Kids programming will be available at both. And by the way, if you dropped off a child or children over there, you can be assured they're having a whole lot more fun than you are. So you don't need to worry about them, okay? So September 18th, and what do I need you to do? I'm glad you asked. What we need you to do is 1, come, and 2, invite. We have a lot of marketing going out into the community in the days to come, but invite your friends and invite your foes and have them sit right next to you. That'd be awesome. And invite your coworkers and neighbors and teammates and classmates, everybody. Invite them into this place. This hope of Jesus and love of Jesus, it's for everyone. We don't want to hoard the good thing that God is doing in this place. We want to invite everyone into it. And so that day, it's going to be sort of like Christmas morning for me. I'm not going to be able to sleep the night before. I can't wait, but I guess I'll have to. I've been waiting, though, a long time. I've also been waiting for football season to start. Wow, okay. They're here, okay? Like, I like college football. I have 2 favorite teams in college football. I know you're not supposed to have 2 favorite teams, but I have 2 favorite teams in college football, and I'm gonna say them out loud. This may create some tension in the room. That's okay, we'll live through it together, okay? My 2 favorite teams, college football. Any team that's playing against Alabama. Thank you. I knew there's good people here. And any team playing against Ohio State. Can I get an amen, all right? Like, that's, wow, okay. We can talk about this after service. But I love the NFL. Like college football, love the NFL. I grew up in Kansas, and so I'm a lifelong fan of the Kansas City Chiefs. And ever since last year in the playoffs, we were eliminated by the lowly Cincinnati Kittens. I've been struggling, and I've been impatiently waiting for the new season to start. I've been waiting. I've also been waiting for a long time, like decades now. I've been waiting for someone to develop a way that a guy like me could have a rock-hard beach body without working out or eating right, okay? And some of you perhaps have been waiting with me. I don't know, but we're gonna have to keep waiting. I've been waiting. You've been waiting too. You would fill in the blanks differently than I did, and maybe you've not even been aware of it until right now, but you've been waiting. We spend a lot of our lives waiting on something. We're just always waiting. I did some research this week on waiting, mostly because I have a really exciting life. Don't be jealous. But I did some research on waiting. I wanted to get kind of some statistics around. In Timex, you think they would know about waiting. The Timex company shared some of these statistics. They said, on average, Americans wait 20 minutes a day for a bus or a train. On average, 32 minutes whenever they visit the doctor. 28 minutes standing in a security line wherever they travel. 21 minutes. We wait 21 minutes for a significant other to get ready to go out. And I know what some of you are thinking. I wait a lot longer than 21 minutes, all right? These are averages here, calm down. Americans spend on average 13 hours annually waiting on hold for a customer service agent, and it just makes my skin crawl. We spend 38 hours each year waiting in traffic. Listen to this, human beings spend approximately 6 months of their lives waiting in line for things. 6 months of totally wasted time. I've met a lot of people in my life. A lot of different personalities and dispositions and likes and dislikes, and I've never met a single person who enjoys waiting. I'm gonna test it out here. If you enjoy waiting, just go ahead and raise your hand. If you do, there's medicine for that. Okay, no one enjoys waiting. I've heard so many families talk about going to Disney World on vacation and what an incredible experience that is. And yet I've never heard a single person say, you know my favorite part of Disney? It was waiting in the lines. It was amazing. I waited 2 hours in line to ride It's a Small World, and I got to hear that song. And now that song is gonna be in your head the rest of the week. You're welcome, all right? And after that, then I waited 2 hours in line to hug Peter Pan, which sounds a little creepy, but people do that. My favorite part of Disney World is the turkey legs. Maybe it's just me, but I've never heard a person say, my favorite part of Disney was just waiting in lines. The longer, the better. We don't like waiting. Excuse the sound. We don't like waiting. And when we have to wait too long, we get anxious. We get restless, we get frustrated, and if we have to wait too long, we're gonna make sure someone knows just how frustrated we are about having to wait. I was reading about the airport in Houston. It's one of the busiest airports in the country, and they had built a new terminal years ago and a new baggage carousel, and they started getting all of these complaints about waiting for bags. Like people were so mad how long they were having to wait on their bags. On average, people were having to wait 8 whole minutes for their bags. It's like, how in the world could it take 8 minutes to unload an entire plane, transport it down the terminal, and get it to the baggage carousel? How could it wait 8 minutes? So the airport leaders, they got together. They're like, what are we gonna do? We just built this new terminal, and people are upset about waiting. How are we gonna resolve this? And this is what they decided. They decided, you know what we'll do? We'll move the baggage carousel farther down the hallway, so by the time they get there, they won't have to wait so long. It's like, what, did they think we're dumb or something? Yes, because it worked. They moved it down there, and people stopped complaining about waiting, and they started complaining about shin splints. So we're just not as smart as we think we are. People hate waiting. And there's something psychological that if there's nothing to do while we're waiting, it seems to last longer. I'm gonna give you some free information here. You can thank me later. That's why elevators, when you're in a hotel or a building, you'll oftentimes see mirrors right there by the elevator. Because in the post-World War II boom, when they were building all these new high-rises and skyscrapers and the economy was really going great, people began riding the elevators for the first time, and they were complaining how long they had to wait for the elevator. Not, I'm thankful I don't have to walk on the steps, but I'm so disappointed how long I have to wait for the elevator. So what they did is they installed mirrors, and they thought they'll like this because then they could spend some time checking themselves out and maybe spend some time checking someone else out slyly that's waiting with them, and people stopped complaining. Now, psychologically, we can play all these games, but the reality is people don't like to wait. So why all this talk about waiting? Because our disdain for waiting can create a real challenging dynamic if you're gonna have a relationship with God. Because if you haven't found this out already yet, you will at some point in time. I'm promising you that you'll be frustrated. You'll find this out about God, that he rarely moves quickly, and he's never in a hurry. Like you wouldn't want to get behind God on I-95, okay? Because he would be in the center lane, driving the speed limit, and not because he's just like this really cautious driver and always has his hands at 10 and 2, and it's not because like he's such a law-abiding citizen, which maybe he would be as well because he's God, but that wouldn't be why. He'd be going slow in the center lane because he's never in a hurry. He tends to move and work very, very slowly. And we don't. We want everything to happen right now, if not sooner. And everything. And I'm not just talking about like getting on the train or waiting for the pizza to arrive or waiting for the phone call to be answered. No. We don't want to wait on anything. We want everything to happen right now. We want our needs to be met right now. We want all of our financial goals to be met right now. We want the dream house right now and the perfect spouse right now. And we want all the dilemmas in life to be resolved right now. We want to have, experience, get, earn everything right now. And so there's some real challenges in a life of faith with God. And here's what can happen. When God doesn't do what we want him to do, and he doesn't do it when we want him to do it, it's very easy to grow disillusioned with God and disappointed in God. What I want you to know is that if you ever find yourself feeling that way, take some solace in knowing that you're not the only one and you're definitely not the first one. Like everyone that has ever lived in a relationship with Jesus has this experience where at times you're gonna feel out of sorts, life's gonna feel off kilter, and the struggle is gonna be God's apparent slowness. And it's so difficult living in a culture that is moving faster and faster and faster all the time. Now this struggle with God's apparent slowness, it's It's nothing new. In fact, over the next few minutes, we're going to look at a Bible passage where we're going to be listening in to a guy named David as he's praying and as he's wrestling through this issue. We're going to be in a book of the Bible called Psalms. Some of you've heard of it. It's like right in the middle of the Bible. If you have a Bible, you can open right in the middle. You'll probably be in Psalms. You can download a Bible app. We'll also have the verses up here on the screen. Man, if you're new to the Bible, know that a lot of us are new to the Bible. It's okay. I do want you to know this, though, that Psalms, if you're thinking, man, what do I read in the Bible? What should I read? Psalms is incredible because what it is, you are listening into people speaking to God and about God. And if you think you're just going to see someone exchanging nice pleasantries with God in Psalms, no, that's not what Psalms is. They're yelling at God. They're mad at God. They're questioning God. They're angry at God. They're sad with God. They're real and raw, which is how God wants us to be with him. Oh, by the way, I don't know what you've heard about God. That's what he wants from us. And so we're going to see in Psalm 13, this guy named David, some of you know him as King David, he's wrestling with God's slowness. Listen to what he writes in Psalm chapter 13. David writes, he says, "How long, Lord? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes or I'll sleep in death. And my enemy will say, I've overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall." I told you King David wrote those words, but you know what? Most of us could have written those words, because we've wrestled with those same sentiments. He said it all with those first 3 words. He says, "How long, Lord?" We spend so much of our lives waiting, don't we? And not just waiting in the Verizon store for our turn, and not just waiting in TSA when we're traveling, but I mean waiting in a much more deeper and much more painful sense, waiting on God. We're waiting for the circumstances of life to change, to develop, to improve. We're waiting for dreams to come true and promises to be fulfilled and breakthrough to happen in our life. We're waiting for God to move and work. We're waiting for God to bring about transformation into our lives, waiting for God to speak, to direct, to clarify, waiting for God to bring healing and hope into our lives, and we're just left waiting on God. And listen, when you find yourself in that mode, waiting, I need you to be encouraged to know this. It doesn't mean you've taken a wrong turn somewhere on the path of faith or life. It doesn't mean you're on the wrong road altogether. It certainly doesn't mean you've done something wrong. What it means is that you are learning what it's like to share relationship with a God who lives and moves at a very different pace than we do, and it's usually almost always much slower than we prefer. All through the Bible, you find people, God's people, waiting on God. The very beginning of the Bible, we're introduced to a couple, maybe you've heard of, their names are Abraham and Sarah. And Abraham and Sarah, these incredible people. Abraham is like this epic character in the Bible. If there was a biblical version of Mount Rushmore, I mean, his face would be etched up there. He's known as the father of faith, and Sarah absolutely deserves to be right up there with him as well. And listen, as people of faith, we hold Abraham and Sarah in such high esteem, and in some ways rightly so, but you also need to know they were just people. And you're like, well, they're not just people, they were Bible people. But they didn't know they were Bible people. They were just like people, right? That they were living, and Abraham's like, hey, I'm a Bible people, okay? No, they're just like living and dealing with the complexities of maintaining relationship with one another and then with God. And so Abraham and Sarah, we're told a bit about their story, not everything, but we're told in a very important detail. Early on in their story, we're told this about Sarah. It says, Sarah was barren. That's how she's introduced. It means Sarah, there's no life in her womb. I'm not going to stand up here and pretend to understand the pain and the agony involved in that circumstance of life, because I don't hear me saying that, but I want you to know, like, in their day, the pain, if possible, it was maybe even more magnified than today, because in that day, sadly, women were viewed as your only role in life is to reproduce children. That's it. That's how they were viewed. And she couldn't. And so for Sarah, being barren, it was not just a physiological reality. It was that. It was a psychological reality. It had become her identity, how people knew her. That's how she's introduced to us. This is Sarah, who's barren. Can you imagine? And listen, they didn't have all the technological advances then, of course, that we do now. But I'm sure as a married couple, they had tried everything you could imagine, trying to conceive month after month, year after year, decade after decade, seeing the other families have kids and the kids running and playing, and we don't have one. And I'm sure that many nights when things were quiet in the house, Sarah laid in bed, don't you think, in the darkness, asking, how long, Lord? How long? I mean, those are heavy words, and they're hard words, and they're painful words. We sit there for a minute. Or you read their story, and as we fast forward the clock, God makes an incredible promise to Abraham and Sarah. Genesis chapter 12, it's the very first book in the Bible, Genesis chapter 12, starting in verse 1. It said, the Lord had said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I'll show you. I'll make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I'll make your name great, and you'll be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Much larger context, here's what's going on. God's making them an incredible promise. He's saying, listen, you two, you're going to have a baby. And not only are you going to have a baby, you're going to have a family. And not only are you going to have a family, but you too, I know you don't believe this, but you too, you're going to become the parents of this incredible nation. And through them, all the peoples that will ever live on earth, they're going to be blessed because of you, through you. I'm pretty sure all Sarah heard God say is, you're having a baby. And she was excited about it. Can you imagine her just like immediately moving in, getting everything all prepared and ready for the baby? And they didn't have, high-speed internet quite yet or cell phones quite yet, but I bet that they had the 1,000 baby names book that so many of us have seen on the shelves at Walmart or wherever you shop. And so they got a copy of that, and they're spending their nights like rifling through the pages and highlighting names and marking pages and arguing with each other about what the best name is going to be and fighting with each other and giving each other the silent treatment about the names. And they finally like, okay, this will be the name. And Abraham, I'm sure he was more of a man than I am. And so he had skills that I don't have. And so he probably built the crib with his own two hands and the diaper changing station with his own hands. He got all set up and he's like, yeah. And then they got all the preparations for the baby ready and they registered at Target. They were ready for all the baby showers. And then they began to wait for the baby. And they waited month after month, year after year, decade passed waiting. Don't you think that long before King David ever penned these words in Psalm 13, that Abraham and Sarah were commiserating amongst themselves, first asking this question, God, how long? Eventually, as God always does, he fulfilled the promise. But get this, not until 25 years later. So long that along the way, they'd given up, I'm sure, thinking we must have heard God wrong. There must have been something in our Chinese food we ate that night. Like, there's no way he really said what we thought he said because it's been 20 years. It finally happens, though, and can you imagine how surprised they must have been? Get this, by the time she had a baby in her womb, she was 90 years old. You hear me, 90? 90 years old. Imagine if you saw in Publix, you were walking down the aisle, and you saw a 90-year-old pregnant lady, what would you do? I'd stare at her. I stare at people anyway, but I'd stare at her, I would take a picture of her, and I would email it to National Enquirer right away, because it'd be like a perfect cover story for their next issue that is coming out. The idea seems so unbelievable that 90, now I'm pregnant? When Sarah finds out she was pregnant, it says she laughed, wouldn't you? Or maybe cry, but she laughed and she found out. There's a Bible scholar named Frederick Buechner, and he kind of builds out the scenario of how crazy this would have seemed for a 90-year-old woman to become pregnant. He says, if this were true, this baby would be born in the geriatric ward of the hospital. He'd be the only baby paid for by Medicare. If that were true, she'd be a nursing mother in the nursing home. She'd be the only shopper at Walmart buying both Pampers and Depends. She laughs because if that's true, both parents and baby would have to eat the same strained vegetables because nobody in the whole family had a single tooth. Though seemingly unbelievable, God fulfills his promise. She ends up pregnant and ends up delivering a healthy baby boy named Isaac. God fulfilled his promise to her, but only after they were languishing in the waiting for 25 years, asking the question, how long, Lord? If you've never asked that question, can I let you know you will? Happy Sunday. Now, maybe so far you're like, no, not for me. That hasn't happened to me. Maybe you don't have a relationship with God yet, or maybe you have a relationship with God and you're kind of in the honeymoon phase of relationship where God keeps it nice and easy, right? And you're like, everything's great, and he gives me everything I asked for, and the timing is just perfect. I love everything God does. That's great. You're so cute. We're happy for you, okay? But the time is going to come when the time is not going to work. And I'm just telling you, the timing tension, it could come in your career. It could come in your finances. The timing tension very well will happen in a relationship in life. Maybe it's going to be with your parents, or maybe it's with a spouse, or maybe a spouse you would just love to one day have, or maybe it's those parents or the children you dreamed of having. A time is going to come when your time frame and God's time frame is not going to add up. And not only will it happen sometime, it's going to happen a lot of the time. And when you find yourself in that situation, living in the painful agony of the waiting, just know that you're in really good company. Almost everyone that's ever lived in a relationship with God has found themselves in this agonizing struggle, just asking the question, how long, Lord? How long? It feels a bit like to me when you go on a family vacation. If you're like our family, we load up the family minivan. And yes, I drive a minivan. Don't look at me that way. I'm already insecure about it enough, okay? But we get in the family minivan and get everything loaded up, and it's going to be like a long trip. We're going to go up, maybe to North Carolina, and you know the question that comes. It comes before your kids are even out of the neighborhood. For my kids, it comes before we're even out of the driveway yet, and it's, are we there yet? No, honey, we're not there yet. It's usually my wife that asks it, but I say, no, honey, we're not there yet. And then there's a follow-up question that's coming. How much longer? I've stopped answering that question in my life because there's no good answer to the question. No matter what I say, the kids end up scolding me no matter how I answer the question. Because if we say, it's going to be a lot longer before we get there, they're mad that it's going to be a lot longer. But if I then say, well, we're almost there, my almost there isn't going to line up with their almost there. Here's why. They don't have the perspective to understand the time and distance involved in such a long journey. Could it be that that's a bit how God feels when we ask that question, how long? He could answer it, but no matter what he said, we wouldn't like his answer because we don't have the perspective to understand the time and distance involved in such a long journey. As we talk about this idea of waiting on God, what I would love to stand up here and tell you is like, but everything's okay, guys, because I have a magic prayer, and if you write down this magic prayer and say it 3 times with your eyes closed, that God will hurry up. No. Or I'd love to tell you that, hey, there's a way that you can peer into the future and see everything that's going to happen, and then that's just going to alleviate all the agony and all the tension. We can't. But you know what? Even if we could, I don't think it would alleviate the tension. It would just compound the tension. It would just make it more difficult because we'd have so many other questions. There's just no easy answer to the waiting. Life with God is going to involve a lot of waiting, you need to know. And sometimes after the waiting, everything's going to work out just absolutely perfect, better than you could have imagined. But sometimes it's just not going to work out at all. But in either case, we're going to get stuck in the waiting. The question is not, will you wait on God? You will. The question is, how will you respond in the waiting? That's the question. David in Psalm 13, he's going to give us an incredible pattern that we can follow in the waiting that we're experiencing in our lives. But before we get there, I think it's important to acknowledge at least how we tend to handle the waiting. Now, I know that we're really different people that live really different lives and all different backgrounds and thoughts and personalities, but I think there's a pretty common tendency about how we handle the waiting. And I would just articulate it this way, that we end up adopting this when-then mindset. And so we just say it this way. It's like, well, when I get my dream job, then I'll be generous. And when I finally get my own house, then I'm going to be hospitable. And once I get the next raise, then I'll be content. And when I finally meet Mr. and Mrs. Right, then I'll be fulfilled. And when I finally finish up college, that's when I'm going to really start taking my faith seriously. When I can finally retire, then I'm going to start serving other people. And we can fill in the blanks all these different ways, but what happens is that when I get what I'm waiting for, then I will begin to live. And what happens is we wait to live. But the reality is living happens in the waiting. Do you know this, that life never happens tomorrow? Life always happens today. It was the incredible woman, Mother Teresa, said it this way so well. She said, yesterday is gone, tomorrow has not yet come. We have only today, let us begin. Life happens while we're waiting, and then the question becomes, okay, how do we live well in the waiting? Listen what David says, verse 5 and 6, Psalm 13. He says, but I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. Understand this, when David wrote those words, he wasn't looking back on his life and saying, oh man, everything worked out just right. God's so good. I love God and I trust God. And he wasn't given a crystal ball where he was able to peer into the future and say, oh, whoa, wow, everything's going to turn out just right. No. When he wrote those words of verse 5 and verse 6, he was in the waiting. He was in the agony. He was being chased down and pinned to the mat by his enemy. He was wallowing in the sorrow of his fear and his struggle and anxiety. It was then that he wrote these words, but I'll trust in your unfailing love because my heart rejoices in your salvation. Just two quick ideas from his response you can't miss. The first one is this, is trust. I'm telling you that the only way to be able to survive waiting on God and even to thrive during the waiting on God is to trust God. It's easy to trust God when the plan's all playing out perfectly. It's easy. It's hard to trust God when we're waiting, isn't it? Because what we want to do is we just want to move into action. We're like, hey, God's not doing anything, then I'm going to do it. And I'm going to get everything arranged just right. I'm going to manipulate the circumstances, and I'm going to do it on my time frame and my way, and I'm going to do it right here and right now. But I bet you found out that when we move into that mode and we try to roll up our sleeves and arrange it all on our own, do you know how quickly we find out how little control we actually have in our lives, right? We hit that brick wall quick. I mean, we find out that we're at the mercy of so many outside competing factors in our lives, but more than that, here's what it is, we're at the mercy of God. And so we have to trust him in the waiting. We have to trust God, and this is so hard what I'm going to tell you. We've got to trust God when he seems so distant, and he does sometimes. And we have to trust God when he's absent in our lives, and it seems like he's nowhere around. But know this, that even when it seems he's absent, he's near and he cares. God's silence in our lives, and this is a hard lesson for us to learn, God's silence in our lives does not equate to his absence from our lives. Because you don't hear him. Don't assume he's not there. You can be sure he's there. I mean, God was there, and God was completely in control when he promised Abraham and Sarah, you're going to have a baby. He was there. And as they languished for years and decades, waiting for the good news, waiting for the positive pregnancy test, he was there, and he was in control. And he was there celebrating with them as the conception happened. And then the healthy baby came into the world. We just have to trust that God actually does know what he's doing. Listen to what one of the prophets in the Old Testament, someone that kind of communicated on behalf of God, wrote in Isaiah chapter 58. This God speaking, he said, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. As the rain and the snow come down from heaven and do not return to it without watering the earth and making it bud and flourish so that it yields seed for the sower and bread for the water, so is my word that goes out from my mouth. It'll not return to me empty, but accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it. You and God don't need to compare notes in order to be able to make life work well. God will be okay. We just have to make the decision to trust him. Even when we don't understand his ways, we have to make the choice. Trust is a choice. When we are following him, it is not a situation of the blind leading the blind. No. Like God, he knows all, he sees all, he prepares us for all. And again, sometimes he's going to work it all out down to the dot of the I and the cross of the T. Many times he will not, but we have to trust him in the waiting. And here's an important idea. I think it's helpful in the waiting to remember is that always remember you're in a relationship with God who knows the end of the story. We're in a relationship with a God. There's a God, a one true God. He knows the end of the story. We're often caught off guard by the circumstances of life. Things happen, things don't happen. We're like, I didn't see that come. Our God is a God who speaks. Our God is a God who communicates. He's the one the Bible tells us he actually spoke and the galaxies came into existence. We believe that here because that's what the Bible says. But he's a God of many, many words. You know one thing God has never said in human history, never will say in human history? Whoa, never saw that coming. God has never said that. He's never ever said that because he already knows. Listen to this. Like, we don't know what tomorrow holds, but God already knows what tomorrow holds and the day after that and the year after that and the decade after that in your life. Listen to Psalm 139, verse 16. The same guy, David, actually wrote this. He said, your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. Our God knows the end of the story. It's a little sobering to think about, but it's true. Our God knows every single person in this room when you'll take your final breath. He knows the circumstances are going to lead to that. He knows where you're going to be wrapped up in life and the days and weeks leading into that. He knows how your family's going to handle the day after that, and he knows everything between now and then. Again, we're serving a God who knows all, and he sees all, and he prepares us for all. And I don't know what you're waiting for, but what I know that God can be trusted, not just when the waiting ends, but when it feels like the waiting will never end. We've got to choose trust. And then David, we see here, is we can experience joy. When you make the conscious decision, day by day by day, that no matter what comes, no matter what happens, I'm going to trust God. Then that you can experience peace and you can experience joy even in the midst of the waiting, that we don't have to settle for this when-then mentality our whole life. So when this happens, then that. When this, then that. When this, then I'll experience joy. Like, no, when you say, no, I'm just going to trust God. I'm going to trust God. Because he already knows today and he already knows tomorrow. And so I'm just going to trust God with everything. You'll find yourself easing into a sense of joy and peace. Even when you're surrounded by so much uncertainty and there's so much unknown in life, you'll find yourself living with joy. And so I'll just finish out asking you this question. What are you waiting for? Some of you right now, you're waiting for God to answer your desperate prayer. You've prayed it and prayed it and prayed it again, so much that you're thinking maybe prayer doesn't work. Maybe these prayers are bouncing off the bedroom of my home, and you're like, yeah, I knew prayer didn't work. I'm not going to do it anyway. And you're waiting for an answer. Some of you, you're at an intersection of life. And maybe you have been for a while, and you're like, okay, God, I'm asking you, do I go left? Do I go right? Do I go straight? Am I supposed to turn around? Have I hit a dead end? And if I turn around or go left or right, how fast do I go or how slow do I go? And am I even at the right intersection? And you're just waiting for God. Some of you, that, again, may not even be in a relationship with God. You're waiting on a new opportunity, a new challenge, a new relationship. There's some of you. And I've experienced some of this. You're waiting on God to rescue you permanently from a fog of anxiety and depression. Dear God, please. And some of you are waiting on God to make sense of the madness that you call your life. Some of you, you've been waiting, and your family's been waiting for God to give you the strength to break an addiction or to confess a secret that has really caused a lot of damage in your life. Some of you are sitting like, I'm not waiting. Okay, but a lot of us are. And a lot of you have been waiting a long, long time, so long that you've sort of grown numb to the waiting and you don't even realize you're in the waiting anymore. What I've experienced even very recently in my life, and I bet some of you have as well, is that I've gotten so focused on the waiting and waiting and waiting and wondering if the waiting will ever end. And if it'll end, when will it end? Because I'm waiting. You get so focused, so consumed in the waiting that I miss out opportunities in the here and now. What I'm telling you is, I say it this way, that at times I settle to be alive instead of to live. And there's a big difference between the two. Think about this. When you're merely alive, you count the days as you go. When you're living, you make days count as you go. And friends, life is too short. And it is way too fragile just to count the days as they go by. We've got to make our days count. If you're waiting, and I know many of you are, I hope that whatever it is you're waiting for comes to fruition. But don't wait to live. Live while you wait. Live on purpose and with a purpose. Live with the sense of joy, knowing that you have a God that you can trust with your story because he knows the end of your story. Whatever you do, don't wait to live. Live while you wait. Let me pray for you. God, we are so thankful that you're a God that we can trust. in the irritation and the anxiety and the agony of waiting. You're there with us. You're near, you're close, you care. You haven't abandoned us. You're not distracted from us. You're not just busy doing other things with people you care more about than us. You're just with us. And we know you have a view of life and of history that is far greater and grander and higher than ours is. And Lord, even when our fists are clenched and our jaws are tightened because we're so tired of waiting, would you help us again and again just say, we trust you. We know you love us. We know you care about us. And that you'd give us joy and peace as we wait. We know you're a good God. And again, even when the circumstances of life aren't good, we know you're good. And we just pray that you will work in a powerful way in our lives as we wait. We pray this in Jesus' name.